Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Play, Pause, Rewind, a special early surprise episode because it's only been a week. But yeah, we're back for our 66th episode. Niles, how have you been over the last week or so?
Oh, I've been okay, just hanging in there and seeing lots of movies. I feel
Yep,
like lately there's
yep.
just lots to see in the theaters right now. We're just coming out of Barbenheimer,
hmm
and that's kind of what some of the stuff we're talking about today. But yeah, it's been a whirlwind, and just a special shout out to also all the law school students who just completed the bar.
Woo!
I just know about that because my partner is going through that right now, and she just completed it, and man, it it sounded brutal. So
Yeah, it
congrats to
sounds
all of
like an
you.
awful test. Congratulations,
Yes,
law students. Also,
yes,
congratulations to the Teamsters, who
yes.
closed apparently a historic deal this week and will not be going on strike. But despite that, both the writers and actors strikes are continuing. The fund to donate to that will still be linked in the description of this episode. But yeah, big weekend for the movies. I have not had a chance to see Barbie just yet. I don't know if you have.
I have not. Yeah.
But that will be our episode next week, and then after that, back to our every 2 week cadence because this is a lot right now. But we wanted to
Yeah.
uh, get episodes out around the Barbenheimer hype, and I will say I have not seen a movie theater like we saw when we saw this movie in maybe 10 years. I
Honestly, yeah, it feels like it's been that long since I've seen that too. Because yeah, like when we went, it was just packed.
it was
You
incredible.
can tell who's going to which movie
Yep.
pretty clearly.
Some
But
people are doing both.
yeah, the brave souls who saw both of them the same day, and
Mhm.
ooh, kudos to you guys if you did
Yeah.
that. Because I don't think I could sit through two movies in a row like that.
Yeah.
But yeah,
And they're so
it's just
tonally
packed.
dissonant from each other. Like going from Oppenheimer to
hmm
Barbie or Barbie to Oppenheimer would be such a bit of whiplash. But yeah, on
hmm
that note, we are discussing Oppenheimer today. So yeah, let's get into that a little bit. Written and directed by Christopher Nolan, Oppenheimer chronicles the life of J. Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, and is an adaptation of the 2005 biography American Prometheus by Kai Bird and Martin Sherwin. The film
hmm
stars Cillian Murphy as Robert Oppenheimer and features performances from Emily Blunt, Matt Damon, Robert Downey Jr., Josh Hartnett, Florence Pugh, Kenneth Branagh, and so many more people, like too many to list. But
Yeah,
it's yeah. What are your initial thoughts on Oppenheimer? Non spoilers for now.
it's a masterpiece, man. Like I
Yeah.
know so many people keep saying that, but I really do think that this is probably Nolan's best work.
hmm
I feel like there are moments in the film, just because it's kind of a little bit more dialogue heavy of a film. It's just kind of a lot of people talking in rooms
hmm
to each other. It can get a little slow,
Okay.
but I don't think that the movie really slows down.
hmm
Like I think the music kind of keeps a good cadence throughout the film, and the pacing's really good. And you got these kind of little different narratives going on at different time periods. Just kind of how Nolan likes to do his things
Yeah, he
too.
loves to play with
Um,
time, and this movie does that as well, but not in the time travel sense or anything. More akin to how Dunkirk does it than a lot of his other films, even though it's still different than that.
yeah, yeah. I'd kind of he played a lot with it in like films like Memento.
Inception,
That
of
yeah,
course, as well.
Inception exactly. So it just kind of that stuff comes back here. But yeah, I think I really just can't find a lot to complain about this movie, and I'm not always looking for things to complain. I feel like I'm very positive on this
hmm
film. I think there's great performances across the board. Just wish the film was maybe a little bit shorter because 3 hours
Okay.
is a little long. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. What about you, Dylan?
Yeah, I mean, like, I wish it was shorter in the sense that I would like to go pee at a certain point, but other than that, I feel like this is astonishingly good. I
hmm
also, as a side note, love that an R-rated biopic consisting almost exclusively of scenes where people are talking in rooms is being so universally celebrated and doing really well financially. It's incredible to see, and I think it shows that audiences still want this, in a decade and a half dominated by superhero movies, which both of us love. A lot of people, it seemed like, we're sort of fine to leave this brand of cinema behind in flavor of popcorn flair. But this is a type of blockbuster we don't get as much anymore, and I hope we get more of it as a result of this. And yeah, while the majority of the film is people in rooms talking, though, I actually didn't feel like it was slow at all. I thought the narrative momentum was fantastic, pretty much from start to finish, and brilliant performances across the board as well. So
yeah, it's got a strong narrative, beautiful cinematography too. Like, I don't necessarily think that you need to see this film in IMAX, but I did appreciate the IMAX experience too. And I am a fan of Nolan's films. Like, you can just go watch our episode on The Dark Knight, and you could just see just how much we love his stuff. And I appreciate too, just like compared to that film, this, because those films, we've kind of talked about it ad nauseum in that episode of our podcast. But that, film is a little bit more pro cop and a little bit more like
it is a little bit propaganda. Yeah,
it's a little bit propaganda, but this film, it feels a little bit more honest and critical of America and the military and our government as well, which I appreciate. And that's not, it's just nice to see this story as well, this story come to light of Oppenheimer.
Yes. And I do think one thing that's interesting is the emotional contrast you will probably feel watching this, because structurally there is a lot of, we have to get this team together and accomplish this impossible task to beat the Nazis. But if you know your history at all, you know what happened. So there is this dread in you as well. So you have the almost like sense of excitement to see them succeed at this scientific achievement that they need to do to beat the Nazis within the fiction of the movie, but you are weighed down by the truth of what happens and how horrifying this thing they create really is. And I thought the film really played with that very, very well. And
yes,
it is, we'll talk more about this a little bit in spoilers, but this is a character study on Robert Oppenheimer. It is not a film about the Manhattan Project even. It's not about Japan or the Japanese people. It's not about America really, although it kind of is more than the other things. It's about Robert Oppenheimer. It's a biopic. And we'll talk about more why I'm stating that here in spoilers. But there have been some critiques against the film along those veins that I think are unfair. And I'll explain more why I feel that way in the spoiler section. But yeah, any other things you want to say in non-spoilers here?
Well, yeah, I mean, we already mentioned it. It's an adaptation of his biography, and what, when we were doing research for this episode, what I found was that much of what was depicted in the film is pulled directly from that book. Like, it's a pretty truthful adaptation, I would say. There are certain scenes that were not included in the book, like Strauss's confirmation hearing. That's something that he did some digging on and actually found, or Nolan found on his own. But yeah, I mean, it's this is just a fascinating film, and on top of it being a story about Robert Oppenheimer, dubbed the father of the atom bomb, we have these themes prevalent through the film of like just fervent nationalism and just blind patriotism too, which I think is a very potent message in our society today, which we'll talk about later too. But I appreciate that it really did hone in on those themes in this film, and I hope that when people watch this film, that it will kind of help them, it will illuminate anybody who has like an anti-communist or an anti-socialist viewpoint in America. Not saying that's gonna happen, but I feel like
it won't.
that's what movies are supposed to do. They're supposed to, inspire some change,
make
in
you
people
think a little bit.
Yeah, show you a different perspective.
Yeah, and elements of the McCarthy era are part of this story as well, and yeah, that's a big part of it. But the one thing I think is very interesting is they say it in the trailer, so I don't think this is a spoiler, but they view what they're doing as a race against the Nazis, and I think that makes it. And this is not to like let the Empire of Japan off the hook either. Like they did terrible things as well, but I think when you are doing something that might be morally not so great, it makes it a lot easier to do that when you're like, well, I'm fighting the Nazis. Like I gotta, I'm
Yep.
fighting the worst of the worst. And I think that is a lot of how America, both at the time and especially since then, has characterized our role in the war, World War II, is just we were fighting against the Nazis. It's like, yeah, we were, but we were doing a whole lot of other things too, and a whole lot of what went on towards the end of the war, specifically in the Pacific arena, was about preparing for the Cold War more than it was about winning World War II. And we'll talk about that more a bit later. But I will say, even before spoilers, there is a YouTuber named Sean. He has a 2-hour, 20-minute YouTube video. It's a documentary video about the dropping of the atomic bombs. If you want a non-narrative historical documentary style breakdown of everything that went into the decision to drop those bombs, I would recommend watching that. It is very informative, and maybe you, if you're an American, know less about that event than you think you do. So
Yeah, right. Well, I certainly did. And there, you've got the Manhattan Project sprinkled in here into this film, but there's a lot of Robert Oppenheimer's life and everything that he did. So you get some before, you get some after the Manhattan Project, and I think it really kind of rounds out the experience too. But kind of one of the last things that I'll say before we move on is just going back to the Barbenheimer thing. I just thought it was just so pleasant to see these two movies not necessarily competing against each other, but like bringing people back to the theaters. And
I agree.
I also appreciated the marketing for both of these movies. Like they honestly didn't need to run ads like for these, because like I just felt like it was just all user generated content of just being like, one ticket for Oppenheimer, please. One ticket for Barbie, please. Like, like
yeah, really
everyone was just
out.
kind of getting in on it.
Right. And it's like, you just know the studios are going to learn the wrong lessons from this and try to make another Barbenheimer a thing. And what they don't realize is that you can't engineer this to happen. Like as soon as it gets a whiff of like corporate decision making behind it, like it's toast. No one's going to want to do it. And eventually the studios did get on board with the Barbenheimer thing, but it was started by like fans. But last thing I'll say before spoilers too, it's just overall this film is extraordinary. It's easily one of Nolan's best films ever. Maybe it is his best. I don't know. I need to rewatch it because there's so much that I'm sure I missed. But yeah,
absolutely. Well, I feel like that's like in a lot of his films. Like even I've watched Memento probably like 2 or 3 times, and every time I go back, I'm like, there's something new here.
Yeah.
And I'm, I don't feel like that as much with Inception, but there's still those things that come back like kind of full circle.
Totally. You want to do spoilers?
Let's dive in.
All right. So I, right off the bat, I was kind of surprised by how, relatively speaking, little the Manhattan Project was in this whole film's narrative. Like, it's a big part of it, don't get me wrong. A lot of it is spent on the Los Alamos location and the creation of the bombs, but there's a lot more about his life, both before and after that event, that we see that I had no idea that we were going to get any insight into.
Yeah, me too. I was surprised by that too. I call it a pleasant surprise, because then we get a little bit more understanding of the complexities of his character, because I feel like at the end of the day, Oppenheimer was, as the father of the atom bomb, very complex man, and a lot of things surrounding the atom bomb are not necessarily black and white too.
Yeah, I will say the dropping of them was absolutely black and white, and we can talk about that later. But So on that note, I think we should talk about the elephant in the room. The big critique some people who I am pretty sure have not watched the movie, have levied against the film is that it completely lacks the perspective of the Japanese people who were victims of the attacks. And it does. That perspective is not in the film at all. But I think that is actually, one, it's obviously intentional, but two, it plays into what the movie is about. This is a film told from the perspective of Robert Oppenheimer. It is about him. And Oppenheimer, as well as everyone around him working on the Manhattan Project, did not consider that perspective, the Japanese perspective, right? To them, the Japanese were a distant, abstract enemy. And I think that is essential to understanding this film and why something like the atom bombs happens in the first place, right? Like, that's why the military in basic training, like, breaks you down and is so cruel to you. They're eliminating your humanity and eliminating the humanity in your enemy, because if you view your enemy as human, you cannot do what the military wants you to do to them. They want you to kill them. They wanted these scientists to build a machine that would vaporize people, and you cannot emotionally do that if you're seeing those people as people. And I think that is what the film is trying to say by not showcasing the Japanese point of view at all.
Yeah, I agree, because I think the film it's not necessarily even about World War II. You know, like, we don't see too much action. Like, there's no action in this movie. You know, we don't see any soldiers on the front lines.
No battles, no nothing.
We don't see any battles. Everything that we hear about the war is just like on the radio or secondhand information, you know, and the movie's not called, you know, Oppenheimer versus Japan or Oppenheimer versus the Axis powers. Like, it's about the man. It's about his complex legacy as the father of the atom bomb. And I agree that I think a perspective of the Japanese empire would have been valuable, but I think it would have added too much to the story, and it would have skewed the presentation of the narrative, and then also the message that that Nolan was trying to communicate. You know, in hindsight, I agree. Like, I think that there could have been maybe even a message at the end of the movie that's like, just, you know, on black text or on a black background, white text that just like tells you how, like, a little bit more information about the bombings. You know, could have told us a little bit about the total casualties, you know, of the people that died in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The numbers that I found online were, you know, over 200,000 total casualties, you know, injured and dead. So it's like, yeah, that could have been helpful. But again, yeah, this isn't a story about that. It's a story about Oppenheimer and the regret and remorse that he feels in the complexities of his legacy.
Well, and how he views what he did. It's
Yes.
not about the consequences of what he did. It's about what he thinks about it, and how, in a lot of ways, he's very self-centered in his feelings about the consequences of these actions. And shit, I had another thought, but I'm totally forgetting. Yeah. Oh, what I was gonna say is, if you were someone who made this critique, ask yourself and be honest: do you think Christopher Nolan, a white British man, is the person you want to be showcasing that perspective? No, it's not. And if you are seeking that perspective, I'm betting there are a lot of films that showcase it. Have you ever explored Japanese cinema at all? Like, I'm not saying I have, but I didn't make this critique. So if you want that film, I bet it's out there for you, and maybe you should go watch it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think that the film does a good job of bringing not necessarily a Japanese perspective, but highlighting the scope of the destruction of the bombs, with that beautiful scene at Oppenheimer's kind of rally after they hear the news of the bombs being dropped.
Oh, it's haunting.
It's one of the best parts of the film, in my opinion. Yeah, like, just the absence of sound or music, the color, the cinematography, but like, you get to see this flash and like the body, he's like stepping on like bodies, you know, this like totally just dissolved body of just, it's beautiful. And I think that showcases the destruction of the bombs, and it gives you enough of what you need in the moment. And then I think
Mhm.
there's these later scene there's that later scene of Oppenheimer seeing like the photos of the destruction of all the people that died
Yeah.
in Japan,
Mhm. He
and you don't
looks
see the
away.
photos, you just see, yeah, you just see his reaction. And I think that punctuates the impacts of his work, and it just kind of serves as a good segue into his regret.
Right. Well, and that's an essential thing is we don't see them either. Because Oppenheimer famously, when he saw the images of the devastation, he averted his gaze. He does not want to look on what he did, so we don't get to see it because the film is from his perspective. He
Hmm.
is sheltering himself. But I think the scene you just mentioned, in the with the like risers and everybody sharing after the bombs are dropped,
Yes.
I think that is the maybe the most important scene in the film for showcasing why something like this happens, because everybody there is cheering and excited. They just did the thing they were there to do. And then Oppenheimer says, I bet the Japanese didn't like it. That is how
Hmm.
they viewed the Japanese people in this moment. And that's the real horror right there, right? They had forgotten the humanity of their enemy. And they killed a lot of civilians in the process there. But I think that is one of, if not the most important scenes in the movie, because that really drives home, I think, the central problem in all of it. And also, in a matter of talking about perspective, color, we have a lot of sequences. The
Mm-hmm.
majority of the movie's in color, but some sequences are in black and white. Nolan, I think, said that the color sequences were meant to be from Oppenheimer's perspective, and the black and white were meant to be more objective. But
Mm.
I kind of got the feeling that the black and white sequences were just meant to be from Strauss's perspective, you know?
Mm.
Because at the end, we go back to that scene with Oppenheimer, Einstein, and Strauss. And then when we go in and see what Einstein and Oppenheimer are talking about, the scene fades into color because Strauss can't
Yeah.
hear. And I think that's what it really is. We have two separate things going on, and the black and white is more focused on things from Robert Downey Jr.'s perspective, who crushes it, by the way.
Yeah. I appreciate I think I agree with your analysis there. That feels more accurate to me. Or at least like, yeah, I think it has something to do with, yeah, perspective
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, Oppenheimer's experiences in the world. Yeah.
Yeah. I also really enjoyed Alden Ehrenreich in these scenes. Young Han
Hmm.
Solo. He was so
Yeah.
sassy. I love when he's like when Strauss is like wondering about what Einstein and Oppenheimer were talking about. It's like maybe they didn't talk about you at all, and they were talking about something important.
Yeah. Right. Or like it's like he was just doing the right thing from his perspective, like
Mm-hmm.
kind of
Yeah.
deal.
Yeah. There are a lot of little quips in the movie that are funny jokes, and I think that like no all of Nolan's movies have that. Nolan is not credited enough for how funny he is, I don't think, but it makes you feel a little uncomfortable because of how like casual and low key all the characters are being about what they're really doing. And I think the theory of it all sort of allowed them to let themselves off the hook in their own minds for what they're really building. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean it's yeah, I think, yeah, we all use jokes and humor as a way to kind of, yeah, alleviate tension,
Mm-hmm.
give ourselves some breathing room, and just like have a reprieve from the moment. So I think, yeah, people could use it as coping mechanisms pretty regularly.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's kind of what we saw here a little bit too, of just people using that to maybe compartmentalize things. But I think at the same time, a lot of these people weren't, like we already said, they had already othered
Mm-hmm.
the Axis powers, and
Yeah.
they just viewed them as the enemy, so they weren't even thinking of them as humans. So
Right. And like before you in the audience like push back on what we're saying about this a little bit, I think like yeah, Nazi Germany was horrible, like monstrous. Imperial Japan was horrible and monstrous too. Um but we're Americans. Do we want to be vaporized for the worst crimes of our government? Think
no,
about that just a little bit, because I don't.
no.
Our government's done some pretty heinous shit.
Oh yeah, yeah. We're
Even during World War II. Remember what we did to Japanese and Chinese people in World War II? We put them in concentration camps too. We called them something different, but they were very similar.
Yes, very, very similar.
Yeah. But I did really appreciate the way this film portrays Oppenheimer as regretful but not remorseful. And I think that is in line with history because apparently he never apologized for the consequences of his actions when it relating to Japan, right? And
Yeah.
even in the film, we see that when he's being interrogated and pushed back, he never says what he did was wrong necessarily, and his he seems like tortured in a very selfish way, if that makes sense. Like it's all
Mm,
like that scene where he's talking to Truman really nails it home, where he and like Truman's being shitty too, obviously, but it's like this isn't about you, man. Like you built this weapon and that killed a lot of people and opened the door to a new world of horror, but it's like this isn't your story really, even though the movie's about him. But like these events are bigger than you. You are not the center of this anymore. This is bigger. And
hmm.
his horror of his actions like never comes from the harm he caused to the Japanese people. It's more about the hypothetical, theoretical harm that comes now that he's opened Pandora's box, right?
Yes. Well, yeah, he becomes that guy who doesn't want to see the H bomb be created because he knows it's going to be much more
Escalation.
devastating. It's going to be 10 times worse than
Mm-hmm.
what the A bomb was. So
Right.
from my understanding, yeah, he became a more vocal proponent for slowing down on that
Right.
and putting more safeguards in place and just kind of having like a um you know national or not national but
Like
like universal
stopping the arms race, basically,
yes,
like
stopping
slowing
the
it
arms
down
race.
because he
Mhm.
saw like he recognized how bad it would be if it happened again. But he doesn't he can't I think he can't seem to get over the fact that it already happened and it's kind of on you. He
Yes,
never seems
yeah.
to make that leap. And even in that scene where he sees the devastation of the bomb and all the people like turning to ash, it's not the people he actually harmed, it's the people who could be harmed because that's what
Mm,
he's all about, right? The theory of it all.
yeah, no, he's a very theoretical man, but I did appreciate Murphy's portrayal of Oppenheimer
Mm-hmm.
because he does feel like a very tortured individual who's simultaneously charismatic and highly intelligent, but also
Yes.
just racked with these feelings of guilt. And, his own personal life is kind of um, not necessarily marred by controversy, but, like him and his wife have had marital issues,
Yeah.
and I'm surprised that they didn't go deeper
He
into
he
that
really
into this
sleeps
film.
around.
Yeah, he really does. It's that communist mentality.
Okay. But you
Yeah.
mentioned that it didn't go into the marital issues more, and his wife is and most of his love interests are just kind of like there and then they're not. And I think that plays into the film being from his perspective. Like that is kind of how he's thinking of these women a lot of the time. They're not his
I
priority.
yeah, seriously, and he's also in an interesting position too as in this film because he's simultaneously feels like he's trying to be this independent scientist who's
Mm-hmm.
um, really focused on the theory and really focused on exploring the horizon. But then he's also serving his government and trying to be a patriot in this country. So it's a precarious situation, I would say.
Mm-hmm. I do you think he was trying to be a patriot? I don't. That wasn't the sense I
Well,
got so much. I feel like it was
yeah.
more like I keep saying theory, but like I think that was a big part of his motivation. And he asked he asks Matt Damon's character, the general, like, what more do you want from theory alone? When they're talking about like, are we
Hmm.
gonna set the whole world on fire? And I think the movie is about what you get from theory alone. You get people who will
Mm,
just postulate about these ideas and want to explore all these different possibilities without ever really thinking about, like, okay, but we're building a bomb. Someone's going to use the bomb. Are we okay with that? And the people
Yeah.
some of the people on the team start to question it, but it's like, my guys, it's too late. Like, you've done this already. And it kind of reminded me of that quote from Jurassic Park, right? From Dr. Ian Malcolm. It's like, your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could that they didn't stop to think about if they should. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, it's the Manhattan Project. Like, you
Yeah.
shouldn't have done this.
Right. Well, and I think too with the whole project, what this movie does well is it makes it clear that the construction of the bomb, while the intention of it
Hmm.
was very black and white, I think the construction of it wasn't as
Yeah.
black and white. I think that a lot of us can generally agree right now in our modern day, hindsight's 2020, the
Hmm.
A bomb was a mistake for the world. But I feel like we can't just simply view its creation in that simple of a light or perspective, because
Hmm.
as Oppenheimer and these other scientists put forward in the film, it's like once the concept of nuclear fission was achieved,
Hmm.
it was really just a matter of time until someone did it, until someone put the
Yeah.
bomb together. Like
Hmm.
it was going to happen either way. And yeah, you're right. They raised moral and ethical considerations during its construction. Like some of these scientists were like, well, Japan's on its way out. Like,
Right.
what are we going to use this on? Like, this is ridiculous. But the decision to drop the bomb wasn't on them. Like, they were there because they really enjoyed their field of work and their science, and they were the
Hmm.
best of it, and they wanted to contribute
Yeah.
to the cause and to their country.
Right. But on the flip side of that, like, they didn't decide to drop it, but it does seem like Oppenheimer was involved in the decision of where to drop it. And
Yeah.
he says in the movie, and I think I remember reading, he said this in real life, like, and no military target is big enough to fully display the destructive capability of the bomb. So they specifically chose civilian targets to maximize damage and scare the shit out of the Japanese. And it's like, that is evil, pure
Yep.
fucking evil, monster. But that it doesn't, like, the movie is not forcing us to hate him for that. It portrays it in a very pragmatic and dry and cold way, and then it is trusting us as audience members to be mature enough to go like, hey, wait a minute, excuse me.
Yeah.
What? And there is that element because the early on it's like, we're in a race against the Nazis, right? And that is in a movie that is not based on a real historical event that went down the way it did, right? It would be like, we're in a race against the Nazis and then we just beat them at the end and we beat them, right? But in this, it's like,
Hmm.
oh, Hitler dies and then the Nazis are basically defeated, then they are defeated, and then Japan is on its back foot, on its way out, and then they drop the bombs anyway.
Hmm.
And it's like, it really, the movie delivers the true series of events in such a way that it feels very sickening to watch, because it's like, it's just kicking a dead horse. Like, the war was basically won at
Hmm.
this point. And I alluded to this earlier, but the argument Truman gave when basically justifying what we had done, the argument he gave to the American people was like, I was protecting the lives of American troops. A boots on the ground invasion of mainland Japan would have been devastating for both sides. But apparently, and I learned this from that Sean video, that was not on the table. A boots on the ground
Oh.
invasion of Japan was not going to happen by the time the bombs were done. Uh, it was between like a traditional bombing campaign or the atom bomb. And the reason they went with the atom bomb had nothing to do with Japan. It was about the Soviets. Because
Hmm.
what was happening was, since the war in Europe was over, the Soviets were repositioning into Asia to invade Japan from, shit, is it still the West? I get confused. From the other
um.
side, we were
Yeah.
coming.
Yeah. That the
Um,
mainland. Yeah.
they were, I guess, coming from the West, and we were coming from the whatever. It doesn't matter. And Truman and his people knew that the Cold War was coming next. We were allies by necessity with the Soviets, and that was the next war. So they wanted to end World War II before the Soviets had more strategic positionings in Asia. And that is why America dropped bombs. And that is also why the deadline, the Manhattan Project team is given is the Potsdam Conference, because that was the last time Truman would see Stalin before the end of the war. And he wanted to have something in his back pocket to kind of say, like, hey, we have a thing and you shouldn't mess with us. That's what all of this was about at the end of the day. It was about posturing against Russia.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes it really
Yeah.
upsetting that, like, we killed so many Japanese civilians for basically a piece on the board in the Cold War. That's what it was.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I remember hearing that you know, Japan was willing to surrender,
Mm-hmm.
but it wasn't unconditional, and
Right.
we wanted unconditional. We wanted them
Yes.
to like completely eliminate their
The
imperial
Emperor.
structure or something like that. And because they weren't going to budge on that one thing, we were like, okay, that deal's off the table,
Yeah.
kind of thing.
You know what's fucked up too? I think they kept the fucking Emperor at the end of the day. Like, we blew the fuck out of their civilians and then just let them keep the condition they wanted anyway, I believe.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's fucked.
yeah. 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 So that sucks. But I think we're talking a lot about the history of this too, in addition to the film, because they're so intertwined, I think. But
Yes.
um yeah, and it's like, I think American Prometheus is the name of the book, right? Oppenheimer is
Yes.
being called the American Prometheus, who gave fire to humanity. He came down from Mount Olympus and gave humanity fire, and as Kenneth Branagh's character says, you've given them the means to destroy themselves, right?
Yeah.
And we know through the history of our species, when we have something that can hurt someone else, it will be used to do that in every instance.
Exactly.
And
Well, yeah.
yeah.
I was just gonna say one other thing too about like just the bomb in general is like, you know, we can look back on it now and be like, oh, what a horrible thing that we did.
Mhm.
And it is terrible, but you know, technological warfare advancements happen
Mhm.
all the time, and they've happened many, many, many times throughout
Yeah.
history. And you know, I'm sure that there have been people who've condemned the invention of ballistics because it's
Mhm.
so fucking deadly compared to other forms of warfare.
Right.
So you know, just I'm not trying to justify the existence of the atom bomb or the hydrogen
Mhm.
bomb or anything. It's just like once we reach like a certain level of scientific achievement
Mhm.
and knowledge, it's like these next steps are kind of inevitable. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah, and you and I have the benefit of almost 80 years of hindsight and are judging this guy
Yes.
knowing what has happened since then, and maybe that's not entirely fair, but I do think, like, a lot of people were concerned that Nolan was going to portray Oppenheimer as like a heroic figure, like a tragic hero, and
Mm,
he doesn't. I don't think he portrays
no.
him as a non-committal, like, kind of weasel in a lot of ways, who is only who could I think he can only be seen heroically within the context of the American government is worse than he is.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like that.
They're the
But
real enemy. Yeah.
yeah,
Kind of deal.
but yeah, it's like, yeah, the concern that he was going to be portrayed as like this great hero, I think, was very unfounded, and I really am getting sick of people making up their minds about movies before the movie has come out and starting a whole discourse about what a movie is going to be before they've fucking seen it. It's very annoying and it's very immature. Maybe, give the filmmaker the benefit of the doubt until you have a chance to watch the movie. But on another note,
Exactly.
let's talk about communism a little bit.
Communism.
Yeah. A shockingly large amount of the movie is dedicated to things around communism. I did not know Oppenheimer was associated with the Communist Party. Apparently, he never joined. Kind of plays into the non-committal nature that he is presented as having in all elements of the film.
Mhm.
He
Yeah.
cheats on his wife all the time. He won't join the party. He won't, like, emotionally commit to recognizing the damage he did with his invention. It's kind of a running theme.
Yeah, no, I was surprised by that too. I had no idea, but then again, I didn't know much about Oppenheimer to begin with,
Mhm.
so it was a good to learn all that stuff about him, and I feel like it adds a little bit of a dynamic layer to this film too.
Mhm.
Just this, I feel like it illustrates how terrible the U.S. government can be
Yeah.
to our own civilians and stuff. Like, Oppenheimer was considered a wartime hero at the
Mhm.
time, like after World War II ended, and he guided one of the most significant achievements of the 20th century.
Mhm.
And he gave so much to this country in that way. And
Yes.
then he's just kind of destroyed by these loose associations to a political ideology that our government just didn't agree with, you know?
Yeah. And I think the this is where I think people should push back more on the concept of like, oh no, there's no freedom of speech in America, because it's not this modern bullshit that people are talking about where they're like very upset that they get fired from their like job for saying slurs at the workplace. It's like, no, no, that's not a violation of freedom of speech. Having
Mhm.
your career destroyed and maybe going to jail or being killed because you believe in an economic system that the government doesn't like, that's a violation of freedom of speech. And that happened
Mhm.
a lot. It was called the McCarthy era. And
Yeah.
a big part of why Oppenheimer loses his security clearance is his ties to the Communist Party. Even though he never joined, they just like sniffed out anybody back then for like alleged communist ties. And it's like, we don't have
Yeah.
freedom of speech in America. I mean, we kind of do. We can like be mean to politicians on Twitter, but we can't do anything seriously. We can't say anything seriously in opposition to the government. you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah, there's limits to
Hmm.
what we can say. And yeah, I just to kind of your point, yeah, there was that whole scene with his first lover, Florence Pugh,
Hmm.
in the movie, and
Jean,
her
I believe her
death,
name is.
how
Yeah.
how it's portrayed, like, it kind of has a lot of different cuts
Hmm.
as she's kind of dying in the tub, and it looks like, yeah, we have a gloved hand
Yeah.
kind
That
of
looks like it
seemingly
was holding
reaching.
her down.
Hmm.
And like the US government killing communists or communist sympathizers is definitely not out of the question, especially in that era. But I do love how it's left a little bit ambiguous. It's like because it's a sequence that is shot in color. So maybe this is just Oppenheimer thinking like, what if this is what happened? There was that
Hmm.
really shady general, the Casey Affleck guy. Maybe he did this, or maybe that is just what happened. Or maybe she just did it herself. Like all of those are possibilities. But like the way it was showing that she drowned in the tub, it seemed to me like someone killed her. That like the just like the
Yes.
specific way she was sitting and stuff like that. It was like, oh yeah, she was murdered by someone in the American government because she was a
Yeah.
communist.
It's on the nose a little bit there, and I just think, yeah, the whole inclusion of communist ideologies
Hmm.
and weaving that into the story here just creates this example of how the U.S. government treats those members of the military or of notable importance in our
Hmm.
society, and how we those who serve us, and the U.S. just, yeah, uses those people to achieve these goals, these
Hmm.
violent ends on on our behalf as a country, and
Yep.
then we just cast them aside once their purpose is served. It's like it's it's slimy, you know?
Yeah, yeah. It's I mean George Carlin said it in his like said it's like they don't want to hear from you until you reach military age. And you're just right. And then
Yeah.
but then they send you, not in Oppenheimer's case, but in your average soldier's case, they send you overseas to go kill people for them, and then you come back and there's nothing for you. And in Oppenheimer's case, they had him develop the most devastating weapon ever created, and then they didn't like his political leanings, so they, to a much lesser degree, destroyed him a little bit. I mean, they took away his security clearance, boo fucking who. But it, like, to him it was obviously important, and it does seem like his house was tied to having it or in some capacity. Um
Yes.
but it does and I'm gonna say in this one specific way, in no other way, reminded me of how the British government treated Alan Turing after World War II. Alan
Mm.
Turing was the one who cracked the Nazi Enigma code. incredibly important to the Allied war effort, but he was gay. And the British government, after the war, chemically castrated him and ruined his life. So it obviously what they did to Turing is way worse than what they did to Oppenheimer. I'm not comparing them in that sense, and I'm not saying
Yes.
Turing is the same type of person Oppenheimer was, but it did that parallel of how these two men were incredibly important to the war efforts of their countries and then were cast aside for various reasons and in varying degrees of severity afterward, I thought was, interestingly devastating.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, also, yeah, with that tribunal scene, I looked it up. Those lines in the tribunal scene,
Mm-hmm.
like all the back and forth, they're incredibly close apparently to the actual tribunal,
Yeah.
the actual things
The
are
like
written down.
in closed doors thing where they were interrogating
Hmm.
Oppenheimer. Yeah.
Yeah,
That
it was
was
almost verbatim,
very well
apparently.
done sequence, I thought.
Yeah, I love that whole sequence, and yeah, I mean, going off of communism, this film, it does feel to me like a stark warning, or at least a stark depiction of fervent nationalism
Mm-hmm.
and blind patriotism.
Okay.
As we've kind of discussed already, these contributors to the Manhattan Project, not just Oppenheimer, but all the scientists, everyone working on it,
Mm-hmm.
it feels like they were motivated by their own scientific ambitions, but also some nationalistic pride because they
Yeah.
were othering those Axis powers.
Mm-hmm.
And even though, yeah, Germany was defeated and Japan's defeat was mostly assured, they just continued to push to complete the project for the
Yeah.
country and for our own security. And then once it's dropped, the arms race picks up for the Cold War. It's kicked off, and then nationalistic kind of fervor feels like it sweeps the country
Mm-hmm.
too. They didn't depict that as much here, but
No.
it's very
Because
much
again, the
implied,
film's not
I would
about
say.
that. It's just
Yes, yes, it's not about that, but then yeah, the tribunal, feels like this cascading effect of blind patriotism, of McCarthyism, of course,
mm-hmm.
in America. But as we just already discussed too, Oppenheimer's done so much for the U.S. and it feels like he's loyal to the country too.
Mm-hmm.
But they barely considered his accomplishments and his contributions
Yeah.
due to the ideological war that our country waged against communism.
Mm-hmm.
And I just feel like that these messages of this fervent nationalism, the blind patriotism, it's increasingly relevant in
Yeah.
our world today, given the state of some of this democratic backsliding across the world that we see. The
Mm-hmm.
autocratization of
Yeah. I mean,
countries like Belarus or Cambodia or Egypt or Israel more recently, or
fuck
India
it
too
here.
as well. So
Like,
yes, here in the United States, of course.
like rolling back. Like fascism in America is well on the rise, of course, as we know. But fascism has been gaining prominence again in this century, and it's pretty horrifying to see because I guess it didn't fucking take long. The people who remember World War II have, for the most part, died and just immediately were backsliding into the conditions that led to some of the worst atrocities in modern human history. So great work, humanity.
Yay.
Yeah, but yeah, the film is so fucking good. It's
Oh, it's
haunting, and
awesome.
I think you're right. Like it paints a really bleak picture of both what Oppenheimer and his team did with their creation, opening Pandora's box and causing direct harm to Japan, but also the coldness and the cruelty of the American government, both to people overseas and to its own people. Like I thought that sequence where it's showing Oppenheimer sort of getting the medal and being welcomed back, and it's like, just know when they do this for you, it's about them. They turned their back on you and they felt bad about it. And so it's the same. It's in the same vein as Oppenheimer's regret about the bomb, right? It's not about the Japanese. It's about him. Just like when the American government and all of his compatriots welcome him back and honor him, it's not about him. It's about them. It's
Hmm.
always about, it seems like a lot of the characters in this movie and a lot of the themes of this movie are just people trying to assuage their own guilt, you know?
Mm. Mm-hmm.
But
Oh, I agree. But yeah, it's such a excellent film. I think yeah, it's one of Nolan's best ones, and really, I don't have anything to complain about.
yeah, and I'll say I think the film just does an excellent job both of portraying who Oppenheimer was and what he thought about the work he was doing, while also showcasing why that specific mentality is a problem and can lead to devastating consequences. And the film, I really appreciate, trusts us enough to where it doesn't feel the need to explicitly moralize anything. It's like you know how to feel. Watch what happens. You know how to feel about this, I
Yep.
think.
Yep.
Also, side note, the him poisoning his professor's apple, that is a real thing that he did.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And also we didn't mention it, but Josh Hartnett is really good in this as his fellow academia member who's constantly exasperated at him trying to unionize the graduate students.
Yeah. Oh, I liked his character. Yeah, he was great.
Yeah.
So many good characters, so many good performances across the board. Like, yeah, it's just so good. Yeah.
And so many actors are in this movie for like a minute. Like Jack
Mhm.
Quaid maybe says 3 things. Gary Oldman is in it in one scene as Truman.
Yeah. Right. It's just like, let's just see who we can pull in. Hey, do you want it? Do you want to be an Oppenheimer? Come on
So
down.
many Christopher Nolan alums in this for sure.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, phenomenal film, of
Yeah,
course. But
absolutely. Well, should we move on to our last segment of the episode
we
where we
should.
talk? Yeah, where we talk about other stuff we've been up to, reading, watching, playing, consuming. Don, what have you been up to lately?
A bunch. So I've been watching the Marvel Secret Invasion show. I haven't watched the finale yet. I'll watch it after this. I'm hearing the finale is abysmal, so we'll see how that goes. The show has been
Yay!
fine, I guess. It's not that good, but it's not horrible or anything. I also watched Invincible Adam Eve, the special Adam Eve origin episode that they're doing in like prep for season 2, I guess. It was pretty good. I liked
Cool.
it. It was like an hour long little sort of feature episode. So that was cool. And
Wow, whole
yeah.
hour.
Yeah. And then I finished House of Leaves last night.
Hey,
Yeah.
excellent. What do you
I
think?
I liked it a lot. There's definitely stuff in the ending that I didn't quite understand or totally get like what they were going for, but I'm excited to read some about it and like look into the lore surrounding the book and eventually reread it. Not for a while though. It took a long time to read.
Yeah, it's dense as fuck.
Yeah. But I know that when I eventually go back to it, like there'll be so many little things that I pick up on that I missed the first time just because a lot of it, like it gives you a lot of information early on that you're not going to have full context for until much later in the story. And sometimes I forget things. But
Yeah, me too.
also continuing watching My Adventures with Superman, which is great. I'm so sad that it only is going to have 6 episodes because that means it's over soon. And
Hmm.
Superman and Lois, about halfway through season 3, continues to be great. And this morning I
Nice.
started the second Brandon Sanderson's secret project, The Frugal Wizard's Handbook for Surviving Medieval England, which is a very fun book title. I'm only like 20 pages in, so I don't even know what it's about yet. But
Hmm.
what about you? What have you been doing?
God, that's a fun sounding book. Nothing too much to report since last episode. I feel like I've been too busy to
Yeah.
explore a lot of stuff, but just continuing on with Succession. We're midway through season 2, and
Mm-hmm.
man, it's fascinating just to watch these people. I feel like every episode I say the same thing where I'm like, oh, I love this character. They're great. They're so funny. And then the next minute, I'm like, I hate that character. They're terrible.
Yeah. But
Because they are.
yeah.
They're all the same. They're the same two sides of the coin.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I've just been continuing to play Tears of the Kingdom on the Switch, uh, getting through it. I feel like I'm getting towards the end of like, okay, I'm getting ready
Yeah.
to fight Ganon for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You've like emotionally reached the point where you're ready to finish it off, sort of.
Yeah, I still got some main quests to get through and
Okay.
stuff, but it's coming, and I'm taking my sweet time with it though.
Cool. Well, that is gonna do it for us this week. We're going to do another episode next week on Barbie, so be sure to return for that. Hopefully it'll be a little bit more lighthearted than this one was. And but yeah, and then after that, back to every 2 weeks. And you know what? We'll see if there are even movies to review, because it seems like the studios are going full stupid and just delaying all of their releases until next year instead of just negotiating with the actors and the writers. So that's slimy.
Ugh,
Just imagine how much money they're losing by doing this.
Oh, I know. Yeah, it's absurd.
Probably more than what they would have just paid the writers and the actors, I bet, by a lot.
Yeah, it's just a weird little implosion in Hollywood,
Yeah.
and we need it to come to an end for those writers. They deserve what they are asking for.
Yeah, and the actors too. But it just
Yes.
it really, what this shows me is that the studio's behavior is just purely motivated by spite at this point, because it doesn't financially make sense for them to hold out. And I think they're violating labor laws by not coming back to the table, because these are supposed to be negotiations in good faith, and the AMPTP just is not returning calls and like not making contact. Like, I think it is illegal. So
sounds illegal to me.
Yeah. It's a shame that our government is the way it is and doesn't care about labor. But where can people find you online, Niles?
On Instagram at Niles Got No Styles. What about you? Where can people follow you online, Dylan?
On Instagram at DylanD1026, on Twitter at D-Day Movies, on YouTube at D-Day Movies, on Blue Sky at D-Day Movies. I think I need to check my username before I get it wrong again. And then on Threads at D-Day Movies. I'm on all the Twitter stuff now, the Twitter clones. Oh God, no.
Or
I'm
the X clones.
Nope, I'm not talking about it. I could do it for hours. I'm not going to. You can also find both of us on Play Pause Rewind videos. That's our second channel where all of our spoiler-free sections of these episodes go up, as well as other videos we make, like Rewind. Our most recent Rewind was on Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's super fun. But if you like this episode and you want to see more, subscribe to our podcast feeds, like and subscribe on YouTube, leave us a 5-star review on the podcast platform of your choice. And we'll see you guys next week for a fun and lighthearted review of Barbie. Bye.
Bye.